I never thought I'd feel satisfaction watching my sister pack her things into cardboard boxes. The same sister who, 5 years earlier, had watched me stuff my belongings into garbage bags while she planned what color to paint my bedroom walls. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. My name is Maya Thompson, and I'm now the legal owner of the house my parents once kicked me out of. It was a Wednesday evening when everything changed, not with shouting or drama, but with the casual cruelty of people who don't think your space matters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, frantically trying to finish a presentation for work the next morning. Mom walked by, placed a stack of fresh linens on the couch, and said, "Maya, honey, make sure you put these on the couch before you go to sleep tonight. Beth needs to move into your room this weekend." I remember looking up, confused, waiting for her to explain. Dad was reading the newspaper in his recliner, not even glancing up. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the sudden pounding in my chest. Mom sighed like I was being deliberately difficult. "Beth is transferring to the university here. She needs a proper bedroom, and you're the only one with a job and income. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. As though my privacy, my space, my life were all just variables in some equation where my sister's needs were the only ones that mattered. Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked, although I already knew the answer from the sheets in her hands. "The living room couch folds out," Dad chimed in, still not looking up from his newspaper. "Just until Beth finishes her degree. 2 years, tops. 2 years. 2 years of sleeping in the family living room. 2 years of no privacy. No space to call my own. No place to retreat when life became too much." And they announced this like they were asking me to pick up milk from the store. I was 24 years old. I'd moved back home after college to save money while paying off my student loans. I'd been contributing to household expenses, buying groceries, even helping with the mortgage when Dad had hours cut at the factory. None of that seemed to matter now that golden child Beth needed something. "Don't make this difficult, Maya," Mom said, noticing my silence. "Family supports each other. That's what we do. Family supports each other." The words echoed in my mind as I watched Beth breeze in the front door later that evening, dropping her designer handbag on the kitchen counter. "Oh, good, you heard the news," she exclaimed, glancing at the folded sheets. "I'm thinking of painting the walls sage green. What do you think?" I stared at her. This sister just 2 years younger, who had always somehow gotten everything she wanted. The sister who had studied abroad while I worked part-time jobs to afford textbooks. The sister whose car payments Dad still covered while I took the bus. "It's your room now," I said quietly. "Do whatever you want." That weekend became a blur of boxes and furniture rearrangements, my bookshelves, my desk, my bed, all squeezed into the basement storage except for my clothes, which were relocated to a small section of the coat closet near the front door. My life, compressed and hidden away, while Beth sprawled out in what had been my sanctuary. The first night on the pull-out couch was worse than I'd imagined. The metal bar dug into my back, the springs squeaked with every movement, and the thin mattress did nothing to provide comfort. I lay awake until 3 a.m., listening to my parents' snores from down the hall and the occasional flush of the upstairs bathroom, where Beth now had private access. Morning brought no relief. I woke to Dad making coffee, the kitchen lights blaring, into my makeshift bedroom. "Better get up," he said cheerfully. "Your mother will want to make breakfast soon." I had no privacy to dress, no quiet space to prepare for work. I grabbed clothes from the coat closet and changed in the downstairs bathroom, its single bulb casting shadows that made me look as tired as I felt. For weeks, I tried to adapt. I stored my personal items in plastic bins that slid under the couch. I developed a routine of packing away my bedding each morning, pretending this arrangement wasn't slowly crushing my spirit. I stayed late at work, volunteered for weekend shifts, anything to avoid the house where I no longer had a place. Beth, meanwhile, settled in completely. She painted the walls, sage green as planned, hung fairy lights around the window, and invited friends over who would stare curiously at my neatly folded blankets on the couch as they passed through to her room. My room. It's just temporary, I kept telling myself. But temporary began to feel permanent as days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months. The breaking point came during a family dinner, 3 months into this arrangement. Beth announced she'd been accepted into a 5-year graduate program at the same university. "Isn't that wonderful?" Mom beamed, serving Beth an extra portion of mashed potatoes. "And you can stay right here with us the whole time. 5 years, not 2. 5 years of sleeping on a couch, of living out of plastic bins, of having no space to call my own." I looked around the table at my family's smiling faces, none of them registering the impact of this news on me. In their minds, I was just Maya, reliable, adaptable Maya, who never complained and always made do. That night, I couldn't sleep. The couch seemed harder, the house stuffier, the future bleaker. Around midnight, I opened my laptop and began searching for apartments. I couldn't afford much on my entry-level marketing salary, not while still making student loan payments, but anything seemed better than 5 more years of invisibility. I found a room for rent in a house shared by 3 other young professionals, on the edge of town. It was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet, with just enough space for a twin bed and a nightstand. The bathroom was shared, the kitchen dated, but it was a space that would be mine alone. The next morning, I called the number listed, set up a viewing for that evening, and put down a deposit on the spot. I didn't tell my parents until 2 days later, when I'd already signed the lease. "You're moving out?" Mom looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought that I might not want to sleep on a couch for 5 years had never occurred to her. But why? "We're family." There it was again. Family. The word they wielded like a weapon whenever they wanted me to sacrifice without complaint. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm moving out. This weekend." Dad frowned over his coffee mug. "This is about the bedroom situation, isn't it?" "Don't be selfish, Maya. Beth needs stability for her studies." I didn't argue. What was the point? In their eyes, my needs would always come second, or third, or last. That Saturday, I packed my life into my small sedan and a borrowed pickup truck from a coworker. No one helped me. Beth was at a study group, Mom was running errands, and Dad was watching a golf tournament on TV. I left my house key on the kitchen counter beside a note thanking them for their hospitality, a final act of politeness that they hadn't earned. As I pulled away from the house, I glanced back one last time. It had never been perfect, but it had been home. Now it was just a building where people who shared my blood lived, people who had shown me exactly how little I mattered when inconvenience arose. I had no idea then that 5 years later, I would be the one holding the deed to that very house, watching my sister pack while my parents' portrait hung crookedly on the wall behind her. But life, as I said, has a strange way of coming full circle. The room I rented was on Lakewood Drive, in a weathered Victorian house split into 5 separate units. My space was barely 120 square feet, with a window that faced the brick wall of the adjacent building. The first night I sat on my twin bed, the only furniture I could fit besides a small desk, and wondered if I'd made a mistake. Freedom, it turned out, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had privacy again, but also silence. Complete, suffocating silence. For the first week, I jumped whenever one of my housemates walked past my door. I'd grown so accustomed to the constant noise of family life, the TV blaring, Mom cooking, Beth's, music vibrating through walls, that solitude felt unnatural, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My housemates were strangers with their own lives. Joel, a night shift nurse who slept during the day, Mark, a graduate student I rarely saw, and Michelle, a bartender with an ever-rotating cast of friends and partners. We shared a bathroom and kitchen, but little else. No one asked about my day or remembered my schedule or noticed when I skipped meals because I was stretching my budget until payday. That first month was the hardest financially. The security deposit and first month's rent had emptied my savings. I'd always been careful with money, but now every dollar was accounted for, every purchase questioned. I downloaded budgeting apps, calculated cost per meal, and watched my checking account like it might evaporate overnight. I ate a lot of ramen, not the trendy kind with fresh vegetables and soft-boiled eggs, the 29-cent packages that taste like salt and desperation. I took extra napkins from fast food places instead of buying paper towels. I showed in frigid water to save on utilities. Small humiliations accumulated like dust. 2 weeks after I moved out, Mom called. Not to check if I was okay, not to apologize, but to ask when I was coming over for Sunday dinner, as if nothing had changed. "I don't think I'll make it this week," I said, sitting cross-legged on my bed, eating crackers for dinner. "Don't be ridiculous, Maya. It's family dinner." Her voice carried that familiar note of disapproval. "Beth is making her famous lasagna." Beth's famous lasagna was just store-bought sauce and pre-shredded cheese. But in my family, her mediocrity was always celebrated as excellence. "I'm still settling in," I lied. "Maybe next week." But next week became next month, and next month stretched into seasons. I made excuses for birthdays, deflected holiday invitations, and crafted a life separate from the family that had so easily discarded me. It wasn't all misery. Slowly, meticulously, I built something resembling stability. I volunteered for every overtime opportunity at work. I took a weekend job stocking shelves at a local grocery store, working from 5 a.m. to noon on Saturdays and Sundays. I lived on 5 hours of sleep and determination. By month 3, I could afford groceries beyond ramen and pasta. By month 6, I had saved enough to buy a small bookshelf and a more comfortable mattress. Small victories, but mine alone. The marketing firm where I worked primary, Meridian Digital, noticed my extra efforts. My manager, Tilly Roberts, began assigning me more responsibility. When a junior account executive left unexpectedly, she advocated for me to take over several of their smaller clients. "You're reliable," she told me during my performance review. "And you've got good instincts. Not everyone has both." For the first time in my life, someone valued qualities in me that my family had taken for granted. Reliability wasn't just an expectation, it was an asset worth recognizing. I threw myself into work with renewed purpose. Every successful campaign, every client compliment, every small raise became evidence that I wasn't just the disposable daughter. I was someone of value, someone with potential. My parents continued calling, their messages growing increasingly guilt-laden as months passed. "Beth misses you," Mom would say, never acknowledging that she might miss me too. "Your father's birthday is next week. He's expecting you." Expecting. Always expecting, never asking. Beth called occasionally as well, mostly to complain about classes or update me on family gossip. She never asked about my life, my job, my new place. In her world, I existed only in relation to her. Mom turned my room into a study, she told me once, about 8 months after I'd moved out. "You mean my room?" I corrected before I could stop myself. "Well, it's been mine longer than yours now," she laughed, missing or ignoring the tension in my voice. "Anyway, she's putting in Dad's old desk and some bookshelves, says I need a proper study space for grad school. Of course, the room that Isaiah couldn't remain mine had been expanded into a study for Beth. The couch that had been good enough for me was apparently insufficient for her academic needs. I said nothing. What could I say? That it still hurt? That I still felt the phantom pain of their rejection like a missing limb? Instead, I changed the subject and ended the call as quickly as possible. On the 1-year anniversary of moving out, I treated myself to dinner at a modest Italian restaurant down the street from my apartment. I sat alone at a small table, ordered spaghetti carbonara and a glass of house wine I could finally afford, and took stock of my life. I had received a promotion at work. I had paid off one of my smaller student loans. I had made acquaintances, if not friends, with my housemates. I wasn't thriving yet, but I was surviving on my terms. As I twirled pasta around my fork, I noticed a young woman about my age being seated at a table across from me. She was with her parents. I could tell from the resemblance and the body language. They were celebrating something. The father kept squeezing her shoulder, the mother beamed with pride, and the daughter glowed with accomplishment. For a moment, envy twisted in my stomach like a serpent, not for whatever they were celebrating, but for the unconditional support that seemed to radiate between them. The kind of support I had never known. But then something strange happened. As I watched them laughing together, sharing food and stories, I realized I didn't want to be that daughter anymore, the one desperately seeking approval. I was building something different. Something that couldn't be taken away with a casual announcement over dinner. I paid my bill, left a generous tip I could barely afford, and walked back to my tiny room with my head high. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time, I was certain it wouldn't lead back to that couch. The second year on my own marked a turning point. Meridian Digital had landed several major clients, and Tilly recommended me to lead the social media strategy for a regional restaurant chain. It was my first major project management role, terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. "Don't screw this up, Thompson," Tilly said with a wink when she handed me the file. "I stuck my neck out for you. I worked 16-hour days for 3 weeks straight. I researched competitors, analyzed target demographics, created content calendars, and drafted posts until my vision blurred. I fell asleep with my laptop beside me more nights than I care to admit." The campaign launched on a Tuesday. By Friday, engagement metrics had nearly tripled across all platforms. The client called Tilly directly to express their satisfaction. That afternoon, she called me into her office. "They want to extend the contract," she said, sliding a proposal across her desk. "And they specifically asked for you to continue leading the account." The salary increase that came with that expanded role changed everything. I could finally afford my own apartment, a 1-bedroom unit in a converted warehouse downtown. It wasn't luxurious, but it had exposed brick walls, tall windows, and most importantly, no roommates. No shared bathroom. No waiting for the kitchen. The day I signed the lease, I texted Joel, Mark, and Michelle a photo of my new keys. Michelle responded with champagne emojis. Joel offered to help me move. Mark, true to form, didn't reply until 3 days later with a simple "congrats." I didn't tell my family about the promotion or the new apartment. Our communication had dwindled to perfunctory holiday texts and occasional strained phone calls. Dad had started sending me links to family photos on social media instead of actually talking to me, as if tagged images of birthday parties I wasn't invited to would somehow maintain our connection. Beth graduated with her bachelor's degree that spring. Mom called to tell me about the ceremony, mentioning almost as an afterthought that they'd love for me to attend. "I can't get off work," I lied. The truth was, I couldn't bear to sit in an audience and pretend to celebrate the sister whose needs had always trumped mine. "You work too much," Mom sighed, the criticism barely concealed. "Family should come first, Maya. Family should come first." The refrain that had justified every sacrifice demanded of me, but never of Beth. I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably until she changed the subject. Moving into my own apartment felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 2 years. I bought furniture slowly, piece by piece. A real couch that didn't fold out, a dining table with actual chairs, a queen-size bed with a headboard. I painted one wall deep teal because I could. I hung art that I chose. Small declarations of identity that accumulated into something like home. At work, I continued to rise. Junior account executive became senior account executive. Each promotion brought more responsibility, more stress, but also more validation that I was building something meaningful. Tilly became something between a mentor and a friend, occasionally joining me for happy hour drinks where she'd dispense career advice laced with profanity. "Never apologize for ambition," she told me one evening, 3 whiskey sours into our conversation. Men never do, and look where that's gotten them. By the end of my 3rd year on my own, I had paid off most of my student loans, started contributing to a retirement account, and even begun a modest investment portfolio with Tilly's guidance. I had also made actual friends, not just work acquaintances or roommates of convenience, but people who chose to spend time with me, who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, who called just to check in. Then came the call that shattered my carefully constructed peace. It was a Tuesday evening. I was making stir-fry in my kitchen, music playing, windows open to catch the spring breeze, when my phone lit up with Dad's number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Our last conversation had been tense and brief. But something made me answer. "Maya." His voice sounded different, strained. "Your mother's had a heart attack." The wooden spoon I was holding clattered to the floor, splattering sauce across the tile. "Is she—" I couldn't finish the question. "She's stable, in the ICU." He cleared his throat. "They're running tests. It was close." The world tilted. Despite everything, the disappointments, the favoritism, the casual cruelty, she was still my mother. I still remembered her braiding my hair for school, teaching me to make her special birthday cake, sitting beside me when I had chickenpox at age 9. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "Which hospital?" "Memorial." "But Maya—" He hesitated. "There's something else." Of course there was. There was always something else. "What is it?" "We're having some financial difficulties. The medical bills, insurance doesn't cover everything, and with Beth's grad school tuition this semester." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. Even now, even with Mom in the hospital, they were asking for money. "How much?" My voice was flat. He named a figure that would deplete most of my emergency savings. Not all of it, but enough to set me back significantly. "I'll see what I can do," I said, non-committal. "I'll be there tomorrow." I hung up before he could respond. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, torn between resentment and genuine concern. I wanted to be the bigger person, to rise above the history of slights and neglect. But I also recognized the pattern, the expectation that I would sacrifice while Beth continued her education uninterrupted. Morning brought clarity, if not peace. I called Tilly to request 2 personal days, packed an overnight bag, and made the 3-hour drive back to my hometown. With each mile marker, I felt myself regressing, shoulders tensing, jaw clenching, confidence shrinking. By the time I pulled into the hospital parking lot, I was halfway back to being the Maya who had slept on a lumpy couch and stored her life in plastic bins. The hospital smelled like industrial cleaner and wilting flowers. Dad was in the waiting room, looking smaller somehow, gray stubble on his usually clean-shaven face. Beth sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, looking up only when I approached. "Maya." Dad stood, awkwardly reaching for a hug before thinking better of it. "Thank you for coming." "How is she?" I asked, ignoring the uncomfortable moment. "Better today. They're talking about moving her out of ICU tomorrow if she continues improving." I nodded, relief washing through me. "Can I see her?" In a bit. They're doing some procedure now. He gestured to the vacant seat beside him. Sit. You must be tired from the drive. I sat, maintaining a careful distance. Beth finally put her phone down, offering me a perfunctory smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nice to see you, Maya. It's been a while. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. But who was counting? You too, I lied. How's grad school? And just like that, we slipped into the familiar dance, superficial questions, rehearsed answers, the careful avoidance of anything real. But beneath the social niceties, I sensed something different. A tension beyond my mother's health crisis. Dad kept checking his watch. Beth's smile seemed strained. Something was definitely wrong, and I suspected it was more than just medical bills. Mom looked fragile against the white hospital sheets, her usually perfect hair limp, her face pale beneath a nasal cannula delivering oxygen. She was awake but groggy when the nurse finally allowed me to visit. Maya, she whispered, reaching for my hand. You came. The simple surprise in her voice stung more than I expected. Had they really thought I wouldn't come? Did they think so little of me? Of course I came, I said, squeezing her fingers gently. How are you feeling? Like an elephant sat on my chest. She attempted a smile. But better than yesterday, we talked briefly, short sentences punctuated by her labored breathing. I told her about work, carefully editing out details of my promotions and new apartment. Some protective instinct kept me from sharing my successes, as if they might somehow be used against me. After 15 minutes, her eyelids grew heavy, and I slipped out to let her rest. In the hallway, I found Dad talking in hushed tones with a doctor. Their conversation ended abruptly when they noticed me. Everything okay? I asked, glancing between them. Just discussing her treatment plan, Dad said too quickly. She'll need to make some lifestyle changes. The doctor nodded professionally and excused himself. Dad suggested we get coffee in the cafeteria, his tone overly casual. Beth appeared from the waiting area, joining us without invitation. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at mid-afternoon. We sat at a corner table, the fluorescent lights, highlighting Dad's deepened wrinkles and Beth's dark under-eye circles. Neither looked like they had slept properly in days. I stirred my mediocre coffee, waiting for one of them to speak. When the silence stretched too long, I finally asked, "What's really going on? And don't just say medical bills." Dad and Beth exchanged glances. Beth nodded slightly, as if giving permission. Dad sighed, shoulders slumping. We're losing the house. Despite everything. Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. The house. The home where I had grown up, learned to ride a bike, celebrated birthdays, weathered storms both literal and emotional. The same house they had pushed me out of when it became inconvenient to have me there. What do you mean, losing it? Dad stared into his coffee. We've fallen behind on the mortgage, way behind. How is that possible? You've lived there for 25 years. It should be mostly paid off by now. I tried to keep accusation from my voice, but confusion bled through. We refinanced. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Several times. Beth interjected. They helped me with tuition. And there were repairs needed, Dad added quickly. The roof, the furnace, that flood in the basement 3 years ago. I remembered that flood. It had happened shortly after I moved out. Mom had mentioned it in passing during one of our infrequent calls, downplaying it as a little water damage. Then COVID hit, and I lost those contracting jobs. Dad's construction business had always been somewhat feast or famine, but I hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. We used credit cards to keep up for a while, but now you're underwater. I finished for him. He nodded miserably. The bank's foreclosure notice came the day before your mother's heart attack. We think that's what triggered it. The stress. I sat back, processing this information. My parents were about to lose their home. My mother was hospitalized, and they hadn't thought to tell me until now. As usual, I was the last to know, called in only when they needed something from me. "How much?" I asked again, echoing our phone. Conversation from the night before? Dad named a sum that made me inhale sharply. Not just for the immediate medical expenses, but the total needed to stop the foreclosure. It was far more than my emergency fund. It was more than I could reasonably access without liquidating my modest investments and taking out a personal loan. "We're not asking you to fix this," Beth said, as if reading my thoughts. "We know it's a lot," but her eyes told a different story. They were asking, just not directly. The unspoken expectation hung in the air between us. "What's your plan?" I kept my voice neutral, professional, the same tone I used with difficult clients at work. Dad rubbed his face wearily. "We're looking at senior apartments for after your mother recovers. Beth can stay in campus housing for her final year." "And the house?" "Gone," he said simply. "All those memories gone." The pain in his voice was genuine. Whatever mistakes my parents had made, both with money and with me, they truly loved that house. It represented their life's work, their dreams, their identity as successful parents, who had provided for their children. Beth's eyes welled with tears. "I've offered to drop out, get a full-time job to help, but they won't let me." Of course they wouldn't. Beth's education was sacred, untouchable. My sacrifices were expected. Hers were unthinkable. "I need some air," I said abruptly, standing up. Outside, I paced the hospital parking lot, phone pressed to my ear as I called Tilly. "They're losing the house," I said when she answered, skipping any greeting. "And Mom's in the hospital, and they need money. And I don't know what to do." "Whoa, slow down." Tilly's voice was calm, grounding. "Start from the beginning." I explained the situation, trying to stick to facts rather than emotions. The heart attack, the foreclosure, the unspoken expectation that I would somehow rescue them. "And do you want to help them?" Tilly asked when I finished. No judgment, just clarification. Did I? Part of me wanted to walk away, to let them face the consequences of financial decisions made without my input or knowledge. But another part remembered Sunday morning pancakes at the kitchen table, Dad teaching me to change a tire in the driveway, the maple tree in the backyard where we had built a rickety treehouse when I was 9. "I don't know," I admitted. "They pushed me out when it suited them. They've never apologized. They still treat Beth differently." "Those are all valid reasons to walk away," Tilly said. "But I'm hearing something else in your voice." She was right. Beneath the hurt and resentment was something stubborn and inconvenient. Love. Damaged, complicated love, but love nonetheless. "The house is worth saving," I said finally. "Not for them, for me." "What are you thinking?" Tilly asked, her tone shifting from supportive to intrigued. A plan was forming in my mind, born of equal parts business sense, emotional healing, and perhaps a touch of righteous vindication. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I might buy it." There was a beat of silence before Tilly burst out laughing. "Now that," she said appreciatively, "is what I call a power move." I smiled for the first time since receiving Dad's call. "I'm going to need your help with the numbers." "I thought you'd never ask. Send me everything you have and we'll talk strategy tonight." As I hung up, I noticed Beth watching me from the hospital entrance, a curious expression on her face. She had no idea what I was planning. None of them did, and for now, that was exactly how I wanted it. I spent the next 3 days in a blur of hospital visits, financial research, and tense family meals at the local diner. Dad insisted on paying each time, though I knew he couldn't afford it, pride keeping him from acknowledging the gravity of their situation. Mom improved steadily, moved from the ICU to a regular room, and doctors began discussing discharge plans. Between visits, I retreated to my old bedroom, now Beth's graduate study, to make calls and review documents Tilly had sent. The house had plummeted in value during the market downturn, but it was still worth significantly more than my parents owed. The problem wasn't the property's value, it was their inability to make payments and the accumulated late fees and penalties that had buried them. "You have options," Tilly told me during our nightly strategy call. "You could help them refinance again, but they'd still own a house they can't afford. You could give them money directly, but there's no guarantee they wouldn't end up back here in a year. Or I could buy it," I said, staring at the ceiling Beth had decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars. Stars that had never been there when the room was mine. "Exactly. And if you go that route, you need to approach it like any other business transaction. Emotions aside. Emotions aside. Easier said than done when every corner of this house held memories, both bitter and sweet." On the fourth day, I asked Dad to meet me for coffee alone. We sat in a quiet corner of a local cafe, away from the hospital, away from Beth's hovering presence. "I think I have a solution," I began, setting a folder on the table between us. Dad eyed it warily. "Maya, we don't expect you to solve this for us. We just thought you should know what's happening." I almost laughed at the absurdity. They absolutely expected me to help. They just hadn't anticipated the form that help might take. "I want to buy the house," I said simply. Dad blinked, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. "You what?" "I want to buy the house," I repeated, opening the folder to reveal the preliminary financial analysis I'd prepared. "I've checked into your mortgage situation. The bank is willing to consider a short sale since foreclosure costs them money too. I can cover the remaining balance and stop the process." "But where would you get that kind of money?" I tapped the paper. "I've done well at work, I have savings, and I can get financing for the rest." "You'd do that? After everything?" His voice trembled slightly, and I saw a flash of shame cross his face. The first acknowledgement, however indirect, of how they had treated me. "I'm not doing it as a favor," I clarified, keeping my tone businesslike. "It's an investment for me. The house has good bones, it's in a decent neighborhood, and property values will eventually recover." I didn't mention that buying the house was also, in some small way, reclaiming a piece of myself they had taken. That symbolism was mine alone. "What about your mother and me? And Beth?" Here was the delicate part. I took a deep breath. "You and Mom can continue living there. You'll pay rent, affordable rent, based on what you can reasonably manage on your income. We'll draw up a proper lease, everything above board." I slid another paper toward him. A rental estimate far below market rate, but still enough to cover the property taxes and basic maintenance. "And Beth?" I fixed him with a steady gaze. "Beth is an adult pursuing an advanced degree. She can live in campus housing or find an apartment with roommates, like other graduate students do, like I had to do." The parallel wasn't lost on him. He flinched slightly, but didn't argue. "This feels strange," he admitted after a long pause. "It's a business arrangement that helps everyone," I said. "You and Mom keep a roof over your heads. I get an investment property. Beth learns independence." Dad stared at the figures, his construction worker's hands trembling slightly as he turned pages. "I need to discuss this with your mother." "Of course. But the bank won't wait forever. We need to move quickly if we're going to stop the foreclosure." I left him with the folder and returned to the hospital. Mom was sitting up, looking more like herself, color returning to her cheeks. "You look better," I said, taking the visitor's chair beside her bed. "I feel better." She patted my hand. "Thank you for coming, Maya. I know things haven't been easy between us." It was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging our strained relationship. I nodded but didn't respond directly. "Dad and I have been talking about the house," I said instead. "Oh." Her face fell. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. We should have told you sooner." "Why didn't you?" She looked down at her hospital bracelet, fidgeting with it. "Pride, I suppose. And we didn't want to worry you. You've built your own life now." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. My parents were from a generation that viewed financial struggles as moral failings, personal weaknesses to be hidden rather than problems to be solved. "I've offered to buy the house," I said gently. Mom's head snapped up, eyes wide. "You what?" I explained the arrangement again. The purchase, the rental agreement, Beth's need to find her own place. Mom listened silently, fingers twisting the thin blanket covering her legs. "You would be our landlord," she said finally, testing the words. "Yes." And Beth would move out. "Yes." She was quiet for so long I thought she might refuse outright. Then, surprisingly, she chuckled. A soft, almost rueful sound. Life has a way of turning tables, doesn't it? It wasn't quite an acknowledgement of the irony, not quite an apology for past wrongs, but it was something. A crack in the facade of parental infallibility. "Dad's looking over the numbers," I said. "But we need to decide soon." "Your father will agree," she said with certainty. "He has too much pride to take charity, but a business arrangement—" She nodded slowly. "That he can accept." 3 days later, Mom was discharged from the hospital. I extended my leave from work and met with a real estate attorney to draft the necessary paperwork. The bank, eager to avoid a lengthy foreclosure, approved the short sale with surprising speed. I had done more than 80% of the preparations before I finally told Beth. We were in the kitchen, Mom resting upstairs, Dad out picking up her prescription. "Buying the house," I said without preamble as she microwaved leftovers. Beth froze, hand on the microwave door. "You're what?" "Buying the house. The paperwork is almost complete." She turned slowly to face me. "And where does that leave me?" "You'll need to find your own place. Campus housing, apartment, whatever works for your budget." The microwave beeped, but she ignored it, staring at me with an expression caught between shock and anger. "You're kicking me out? After everything they've done for you?" The absurdity of her statement made me laugh out loud. "Everything they've done for me? You mean like making me sleep on the couch so you could have my room? Or not bothering to check if I was okay when I was living out of my car for weeks after that?" "Your car?" Her voice faltered. "What are you talking about?" And in that moment, I realized she genuinely didn't know. My parents had never told her the full story of what happened after I left. "You lived in your car?" Beth repeated, her voice small and uncertain. I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. The weight of years of unspoken resentment pressed down on me. For almost a month. The room I eventually found wasn't available right away. I couldn't afford a hotel for that long. "But why didn't you stay with friends?" "Because I was too embarrassed to tell anyone what had happened," I admitted. Too ashamed to say my family had kicked me out with nowhere to go. Beth shook her head slowly. "That's not what happened. Mom said you were moving in with college friends. That you wanted your independence." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Is that what they told you?" "They said." Beth paused, the certainty in her voice wavering. "They said you were planning to move out anyway, and the timing just worked out well with me transferring schools." "And you believed that? That I voluntarily chose to sleep on a couch in the living room for weeks before suddenly deciding to move out with no warning?" Beth sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her forgotten leftovers still sitting in the microwave. "I thought it was weird, but Mom and Dad said you were just being dramatic about the couch, that you were using it as an excuse to do what you wanted anyway." I could almost hear my mother's voice saying those exact words, rewriting the narrative to absolve herself of guilt, protecting Beth from knowing the uncomfortable truth, that her education had come at the expense of my stability. "They lied. To you," I said simply. "I had nowhere to go. I slept in my car in different parking lots every night because I was afraid of being noticed. I showered at the gym. I ate fast food because I had no kitchen. My clothes smelled because I couldn't afford laundry." Beth's face had gone pale. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Of course you didn't. It would have ruined the perfect family image. they needed you to believe in. So all those times they said you were too busy to come to family dinners. I was working multiple jobs to afford rent, or too hurt to face all of you acting like nothing had happened. Beth stared at her hands. Why didn't you ever tell me? Would it have changed anything? I asked. Would you have given up my room? Your spot at the university? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Look, I said, softening my tone slightly. This isn't about punishing you. I'm not kicking you out immediately. You have time to find somewhere else. But this house, I gestured around us, is going to be mine. And I need to set boundaries that should have been set a long time ago. Does Mom know about the car? I don't know. I never told them directly. Maybe they guessed, but didn't want to face it. Beth looked genuinely distressed. I'm sorry, Maya. I didn't understand. I know. And strangely, I did believe her. Beth had been raised as the golden child, the special one whose needs always came first. She had never been asked to question that treatment or consider its impact on me. The front door opened, and Dad called out that he was back with Mom's medicine. Beth and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement that this conversation wasn't finished, but would be paused. The next morning, I met with the real estate attorney to finalize the purchase agreement. Everything was in order. The short sale approved by the bank, my financing secured through a combination of savings and a mortgage leveraging my excellent credit score, the rental agreement for my parents drafted and ready for signatures. As I signed my name on the final document, a strange calm settled over me. This house, the source of both cherished memories and profound pain, would soon be legally mine. Not because they had given it to me, but because I had earned it. When I returned home, and it was strange to think of it that way again, Beth was in the driveway loading boxes into her car. What are you doing? I asked, genuinely surprised by her speed. Moving some things to a friend's apartment, she said, not meeting my eyes. She has a spare room I can use until I figure out something permanent. Beth, I didn't mean you had to leave immediately. No, it's okay. She finally looked at me, her expression resolute. You were right. It's time I learned to stand on my own, like you had to do. I helped her carry the remaining boxes. Neither of us spoke much, but the silence felt different than before. Not hostile, not forced, but contemplative. As she closed the trunk, Beth hesitated. I always thought you were the lucky one, you know. Me? I couldn't mask my disbelief. How? You seemed so capable. You got good grades without trying. You were always the responsible one everyone counted on. Mom and Dad were always bragging about you to their friends. I shook my head, trying to reconcile this perception with my own experience. They had a funny way of showing it. I know that. Now. Beth twisted her keys in her hand. I think they bragged about you because they didn't have to worry about you. You were going to succeed no matter what. Me, they worried about constantly. It was a perspective I had never considered. That their differential treatment might have stemmed from confidence in me rather than preference for her. It didn't excuse what they had done, but it added a layer of complexity I wasn't quite ready to process. Good luck with the house, Beth said finally, opening her car door. Try not to be too hard on them. They really do love you, even if they're terrible at showing it. I watched her drive away, our relationship fundamentally altered. Not healed, that would take more than one honest conversation, but perhaps on a path toward something more authentic than before. Inside, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing the rental agreement I had left there earlier. Her face was pensive, fingers tracing my name on the landlord line. Beth's moving to her friend's place, I said, setting my keys on the counter. Temporarily. Mom nodded slowly. She told us she needed to learn independence, that she'd been sheltered too long. She looked up at me. You told her about the car, didn't you? So she had known. The confirmation stung, even after all this time. Yes. We should have helped you more, she admitted, surprising me with her directness. We didn't handle it well. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my mother, proud, stubborn, incapable of admitting weakness. It was significant. No, you didn't, I agreed, sitting across from her. And now you own our house. She gestured to the paperwork between us. Life has a strange way of balancing accounts, doesn't it? I studied her face, noticing for the first time how much she had aged in the years since I'd left. The heart attack had accelerated the process, adding lines of worry, thinning her once robust figure. I'm not doing this for revenge, Mom. No? She raised an eyebrow. Not even a little? I considered lying, then decided against it. We had all done enough lying, maybe a little, I conceded. But mostly, I'm doing it because it makes financial sense, and because despite everything, this house matters to me too. She picked up the pen and signed her name on the rental agreement, then slid it toward me. Well then, landlord, she said with the ghost of a smile. I believe we have a deal. The first month of being a landlord to my own parents was a strange exercise in redefined boundaries. I returned to my apartment in the city, back to my job and the life I had built. But I found myself driving back to the house most weekends, partly to check on Mom's recovery, partly to oversee repairs I had started, and partly because I was still processing the seismic shift in our family structure. During those visits, I stayed in Beth's now vacant room, my old room, which felt like inhabiting a space between past and present. She had left most of her furniture, but taken her personal items, creating an impersonal backdrop that held ghosts of both our occupancies. On the third such weekend, I decided it was time for a change. I'm going to renovate the bedroom, I announced over breakfast, watching my parents' reactions carefully. Dad paused mid-bite. What's wrong with it? Nothing's wrong with it, I said, stirring my coffee. But it's my house now and I want to make some changes. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, a silent communication I couldn't quite interpret. Of course, Mom said finally. Whatever you think is best. There was a new deference in her tone that still felt foreign to my ears. My mother, who had once dictated every aspect of household decisions, was now yielding to my authority. It was both satisfying and disorienting. That afternoon, I emptied the room completely, moving Beth's abandoned furniture to the basement. I took measurements, made notes, and created a design plan that reflected my own taste rather than accommodating anyone else's preferences. Dark blue walls, built-in bookshelves, a proper desk with storage. Everything I had wanted but never been allowed to implement years ago. As I worked, Dad hovered in the doorway, watching silently. Need something? I asked, not looking up from my measuring tape. Just curious what you're planning. He stepped inside hesitantly, as if needing permission to enter. Could use some help with the heavy lifting if you want. I considered refusing, maintaining the professional distance I had established. But something in his uncertain posture, so unlike the authoritative father I had grown up with, made me relent. Sure, I'm thinking of putting shelves along this wall. What do you think? He studied the space with the practiced eye of someone who had worked construction for decades. Good choice. The studs are 16 inches on center there. Easy mounting. We worked together for the rest of the afternoon, measuring and planning. Dad offered suggestions about materials and construction methods, but carefully framed each as a question rather than a directive. I found myself actually appreciating his expertise now that it wasn't being imposed upon me. By evening, we had a solid renovation plan. Mom insisted I stay for dinner, and the three of us ate in a strange new harmony. Not quite comfortable, not quite familial, but not entirely businesslike either. Beth called today, Mom mentioned as we cleared the dishes. She's found an apartment. With 2 roommates, graduate students like her. That's good, I said neutrally. She seems different, Dad added. More independent. I loaded the dishwasher, hiding my smile. Moving out will do that to you. The comment hung in the air, layered with unspoken meaning. Mom quietly excused herself to take her evening medication. When she was gone, Dad leaned against the counter, his weathered hands gripping the edge. I owe you an apology, Maya, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. For the couch. For not making sure you had somewhere to go. For everything. I stilled. Unprepared for this moment I had imagined countless times over the years. I told myself we were teaching you self-reliance, he continued. That you'd be better off learning to stand on your own. But the truth is, we just found it. Easier to ask you to sacrifice than to tell Beth no. His voice broke slightly on the last words. I watched him struggle to maintain composure. This proud man who had never admitted weakness in my presence before. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, genuinely curious. He gestured vaguely around us. Because you own this house now. Because you could have let us lose it, but you didn't. Because you're a better person than I taught you to be. I absorbed his words, feeling neither the vindication nor the healing I had expected such an acknowledgement might bring. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness for all the years we had lost, all the trust that had been broken. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, I said honestly, but I appreciate you saying it. He nodded, accepting this partial response as more than he deserved. The renovation became my weekend project over the next month. I took a perverse pleasure in dismantling the room Beth had inhabited, stripping it down to bare walls before rebuilding it in my own image. Dad continued to help, our conversations gradually becoming less stilted as we focused on the practical tasks at hand. Mom contributed in her own way, bringing sandwiches while we worked, offering decorating suggestions that I sometimes accepted, and sometimes gently declined. She was trying, in her limited capacity, to build something new between us. Meanwhile, I juggled my growing responsibilities at work with my new role as property owner. Tilly continued to provide advice, both professional and personal. How's the landlord life treating you? She asked over lunch one day. They paying rent on time? Yes, I smiled. Direct deposit, first of every month. And emotionally? How's that balance sheet looking? I considered the question carefully. It's complicated. Dad actually apologized the other day. Tilly raised her eyebrows. Wow, didn't see that coming? Me neither. It should feel like a victory, but you're discovering that winning doesn't always feel like you thought it would, she finished for me. I nodded, grateful for her understanding. Maya, she said, leaning forward, what you've done is impressive. You've turned a terrible situation into financial security for yourself while helping your family avoid homelessness. That's objectively good. But closure, real emotional closure, that's trickier. I thought owning the house would fix everything, I admitted. That it would somehow erase what happened. Property transfers can't heal relationship wounds, Tilly said gently. But they can create space for new patterns to emerge. You've changed the power dynamic. That's step 1. What's step 2? She shrugged. That's up to you. Forgiveness? Continued distance? Some middle path? There's no right answer. I'm still figuring it out, I said. Take your time. You've earned that luxury. When the bedroom renovation was finally complete, I invited Beth to see it. She had settled into her new apartment with roommates, experiencing for the first time the challenges and freedoms of independent living. We had spoken occasionally, short conversations that carefully navigated our new relationship. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon, bearing a housewarming gift, a small potted plant. For your new room, she said awkwardly, handing it to me. Even though it's in the old house, I smiled at the gesture. Thanks. Come see what I've done. I led her upstairs, watching her reaction as she entered the transformed space. Gone were the sage green walls and fairy lights of her occupation. Gone, too, were the pink flowers and ruffled curtains from my teenage years. In their place was something entirely new, sophisticated, practical, adult. "It's beautiful," she said, turning slowly to take it all in. "It doesn't even look like the same room." "That's the point," I replied. "It's not the same room. And I'm not the same person." Beth ran her hand along the new built-in bookshelf. "I like who you've become," she said quietly, "even if it happened because of our family's mistakes." It was perhaps the most insightful thing my sister had ever said to me, acknowledging both the pain of the past and the growth it had ultimately forced. "Me too," I admitted, though I might have preferred an easier path. She laughed softly. "Wouldn't we all?" As we stood there in the remade space, I realized something had shifted between us as well. We weren't yet friends, perhaps never would be, but we were no longer locked in the old patterns of favored and unfavored child. We were just two adults with a complicated shared history, finding our way toward something new. 6 months after, I became the legal owner of my parents' home. An unexpected opportunity arose at work. Meridian Digital was expanding, opening a new office in Seattle, and Tilly recommended me to head the digital strategy department there. "It's a big promotion," she said, dropping the news casually as we reviewed quarterly reports. "More money, more responsibility, chance to build your own team." "Seattle?" I repeated, mind racing. "That's across the country." "Hence the more money part," she smiled. "They know it's a big ask." I took the information packet home to my apartment, spreading the details across my kitchen table. The salary was nearly double what I currently made. The position came with equity in the company. The relocation package was generous. Under normal circumstances, I would have accepted immediately. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I had been working toward: recognition of my skills, a chance to grow professionally, financial security that would have seemed impossible when I was sleeping in my car. But now there was the house. My house. And my parents living in it. I drove to my property that weekend, the Seattle offer weighing heavily on my mind. Mom was gardening when I arrived, something she had taken up during her recovery as a gentle form of exercise. "You're earlier than usual," she noted, brushing dirt from her knees as she stood to greet me. "Had some thinking to do. Thought I'd do it here." She studied my face with the perceptive gaze mothers somehow never lose, regardless of how strained the relationship becomes. "Something's happened." I nodded, following her inside. Dad was in the living room watching baseball, but muted the TV when we entered. "Maya's got news," Mom announced. I explained the job offer, watching their reactions carefully. Dad's expression remained neutral, but Mom's eyes widened with alarm. "Seattle? But what about—" She gestured vaguely around us, not completing the thought. "The house would remain yours to rent," I assured them. "That wouldn't change." "But who would fix the leaky faucets?" Dad asked, only half joking. Over the past months, he and I had tackled several repair projects together, gradually rebuilding our relationship through shared tasks. "I'd hire a property management company," I explained. "They'd handle maintenance, collect rent, deal with any issues." "It wouldn't be the same," Mom said quietly. And it wouldn't be. Despite everything, our new arrangement had developed into something unexpectedly functional. Not perfect, not entirely healed, but workable. I had established boundaries they now respected. They had adapted to their role as tenants with more grace than I had anticipated. We had found a strange equilibrium. Moving to Seattle would disrupt that balance. It would place a professional buffer between us, the property management company, removing the direct connection that had forced us to develop healthier communication. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "It's a big opportunity, but there are complications." You should take it, Dad said suddenly. Mom and I both turned to him in surprise. Pete? Mom began, a note of protest in her voice. No, listen, he continued. Maya has put her life on hold for this family enough times. We can't ask her to turn down a promotion like this just to stay close to us. His words stunned me. This from the man who had once thought nothing of making me sleep on a couch for his other daughter's convenience. I'm not putting my life on hold, I said carefully. I'm weighing options. The house will still be here? Dad said. We'll still be here. Seattle has airports. You can visit. Mom's expression was complicated, reluctant agreement mixed with what looked almost like grief. Your father's right, she admitted finally. You should take the job. I hadn't expected. Their support had perhaps even been bracing for them to make me feel guilty for considering it. Their encouragement left me oddly unmoored. I'll think about it, I promised. Later that evening, I called Beth to share the news. Our relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship over the past months, built on occasional coffee meetings and a shared text thread about our parents' quirks. Seattle sounds amazing, she enthused. Tilly must really believe in you to recommend you for something that big. Yeah, but the timing is complicated with the house and everything. Because of Mom and Dad? Partly, I admitted. We've just started figuring out how to function in this new dynamic. Long-distance landlording is different. Beth was silent for a moment. What if I moved back in? What? Not permanently, she clarified quickly. Just until I finish my program next year. I could rent a room, properly rent it with a lease and everything. I could keep an eye on the place, make sure the property management company doesn't slack off. You'd pay rent to live in the house you once had for free? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Fair is fair, she said simply. I should have been paying all along, like you were. I considered her proposal. Beth had changed significantly since moving out, becoming more self-aware, more independent. Our conversations had evolved from surface pleasantries to occasional moments of real connection. It wouldn't be the same room, I warned. That one's mine now, she laughed. Obviously, I was thinking the guest room. I don't need much space now that I've learned to live with roommates. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Beth voluntarily downsizing her living space, asking permission to occupy a small room in the house where she had once been given priority. I'll think about it, I promised, echoing what I had told our parents earlier. And think about it I did, for several sleepless nights. The Seattle opportunity represented professional advancement beyond what I had imagined possible a few years ago. Staying for the house, for my parents, felt dangerously close to falling back into old patterns of sacrifice. Yet something had undeniably shifted in our family dynamic. My parents' encouragement to take the job seemed genuine, not manipulative. Beth's offer to help felt like actual support, not entitlement. I scheduled a video call with Tilly on a Sunday evening, needing her objective perspective. If this were strictly a business decision, what would you advise? I asked after explaining the situation. She considered thoughtfully. Strictly business? Take the job, hire the property managers, build your career. The house is an investment that will appreciate regardless of whether you're physically present. And not strictly business? That's more complicated. She tilted her head. What are you really asking, Maya? I sighed, struggling to articulate the tangled emotions. I'm asking if it's weak to still care about my relationship with them after everything that happened. Weak? Tilly's eyebrows shot up. No. Human, maybe. Complicated, definitely. But not weak. They hurt me, I said simply. Yes, they did. And you've held them accountable in your own way. The question now is what kind of relationship you want moving forward, if any. Her words crystallized something I had been circling. The Seattle's decision wasn't really about the job or the house. It was about what kind of closure I needed with my family. Taking the job doesn't mean forgiveness, Tilly added gently. And turning it down doesn't mean surrender. There's no single right answer here. When we ended the call, I wasn't any closer to a decision, but I felt clearer about what I was really choosing between. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the Seattle hiring team. I needed more information before I could decide about remote work possibilities, travel expectations, long-term career trajectory. If I was going to make this decision, I wanted it to be fully informed. As I prepared for the meeting, my phone chimed with a text from Beth. No pressure on the room thing. Just want you to know you have options. Something about her message, the lack of expectation, the simple offer of support, felt like a turning point. Not just for Beth and me, but for what our family might still become. The meeting with the Seattle team went better than expected. They were eager to have me on board, impressed by the portfolio Tilly had shared and the results I'd achieved with existing clients. When I mentioned concerns about balancing the new position with my property management responsibilities, the regional director, a woman named Michelle who reminded me somewhat of Tilly, surprised me with her flexibility. We could start with a hybrid arrangement, she suggested. 2 weeks on site, 2 weeks remote, at least for the first 6 months. That would give you time to transition your responsibilities here and establish yourself with the team there. It was more accommodation than I had anticipated, making the opportunity even more enticing. I thanked them for their time, promising a decision within the week. Back at my apartment, I created a detailed pros and cons list, a habit I'd developed during the turbulent months after moving out of my parents' house. The professional advantages of accepting the position were clear. Career advancement, financial security, new challenges. The hesitations were entirely personal, centered around the house and the fragile reconstruction of family relationships. I scheduled dinner with my parents to discuss the potential arrangement. The role reversal still struck me at odd moments, me initiating family meetings, them accommodating my schedule. We met at a modest Italian restaurant, neutral territory where we could speak openly. The company is offering a hybrid schedule, I explained after ordering. I'd split my time between here and Seattle, at least initially. That sounds promising, Mom said, tearing a breadstick in half. Better than moving completely, Dad nodded. Would you stay at the house when you're in town? That's partly what I wanted to discuss. I took a sip of water, organizing my thoughts. Beth offered to rent the guest room while I'm gone, to help keep an eye on things. Their reactions were telling. Mom's immediate nod of approval, Dad's thoughtful consideration. That could work, he said finally. She's become more responsible these past months. She has, I agreed, still slightly surprised by this evolution in my once entitled sister. You know, Mom said hesitantly, if both you girls were at the house, we could consider other options. What kind of options? I asked. Guard immediately raised. Mom glanced at Dad, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. We've been talking about downsizing. The house is bigger than we need now, especially with your mother's health considerations. The stairs are becoming an issue. This was unexpected. I had assumed they would want to stay in the house indefinitely, clinging to the familiar. There's a single-story condo development for older adults about 20 minutes away, Mom continued. Some of our friends have moved there. Everything's accessible, there's less maintenance, and they have some nice community amenities. It would be cheaper, too, Dad added. The rental payments to you are manageable, but still a stretch on our fixed income. I sat back, processing this information. Why didn't you mention this before? We weren't sure if you'd want us to leave. The house, Mom admitted. You've put so much into making it yours again. And, Dad added with uncharacteristic self-awareness, we weren't sure if you'd think we were trying to get out of our arrangement. They had been tiptoeing around my feelings, I realized, much as I had once tiptoed around theirs. The realization was both touching and frustrating. "The house is an investment property for me," I said, trying to approach this professionally. "If you'd prefer to live somewhere else, we can certainly discuss ending the lease early." "Would you sell it?" Mom asked, a hint of the old anxiety in her voice. I considered the question honestly. The house represented financial security, but also a complicated emotional history. I had reclaimed it, renovated parts of it, made peace with some of its memories. But did I want to keep it indefinitely? "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "I might. Or I might keep it as a rental property. Beth living there could make that transition easier." Mom nodded, seemingly relieved that I wasn't dismissing the idea outright. "We don't need to decide everything tonight," Dad said reasonably. "But it's good to know where we all stand." The rest of the dinner passed with discussion of practical details, timelines for the Seattle position, the condo development's waiting list, Beth's semester schedule. It was the most straightforward conversation we'd had in years, unmarred by the emotional undercurrents that usually complicated our interactions. As we were finishing dessert, Dad cleared his throat again, a sign I recognized as preceding something difficult for him. "There's something else we should talk about while we're being honest." He glanced at Mom, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Your mother and I have been updating our will." I stiffened slightly. Estate planning wasn't a topic we had broached before. "We want to do things differently this time," he continued. "More fairly." "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "The way we handled things before." He paused, searching for words. "Giving. Beth priority, making you sacrifice. It wasn't right. We don't want to repeat those mistakes." Mom reached across the table to touch my hand. "What your father is trying to say is that we're splitting everything equally between you and Beth. No favoritism, no assumptions about who needs more help." "We don't have much," Dad added, "but what we do have should be shared fairly." Their earnestness caught me off guard. This symbolic gesture, acknowledging past inequity, committing to future fairness, touched something deeper than I had expected. "Thank you," I said simply, unsure how else to respond. Dad nodded, clearly relieved to have the conversation behind us. Mom squeezed my hand once more before releasing it. Later that night, I called Beth to update her on the dinner discussion. "They want to move to a senior condo?" she asked, sounding as surprised as I had been. Apparently, they seemed pretty serious about it. "Huh. That's actually smart. The house is too big for them now." "Does that change your thoughts about renting a room?" I asked. Beth was quiet for a moment. "Actually, I've been thinking more about that. What if, instead of just renting a room, I took over the entire house lease? I could get a roommate or two to make it affordable. You want to rent the whole house?" This conversation was full of surprises. If you decide to take the Seattle job, full-time eventually, it might be easier for you. And honestly, I've realized I like the house. It has good memories, despite everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. Beth wanting to rent the house I now owned after I had been forced to leave. It years ago, but rather than bitterness, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if a circle was being drawn to its natural close. "We can discuss it," I said. "But first, I need to make a decision about Seattle." "Whatever you choose, I support it," Beth said, with a sincerity that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "You've earned the right to prioritize yourself." After we hung up, I sat at my window overlooking the city lights, turning over all these developments in my mind. The Seattle opportunity, my parents' desire to downsize, Beth's interest in the fee house, all converging to create a crossroads I hadn't anticipated. For years, I had defined myself in opposition to what my family had done to me. My ambition, my independence, even my purchasing of the house, all had been shaped by that defining moment of betrayal. Now, with healing slowly occurring and new possibilities emerging, I faced a different question entirely. Who was I apart from that story? Who could I become if I chose to move forward rather than continue balancing old accounts? After a week of deliberation, I accepted the Seattle position with the hybrid arrangement. The decision felt right. A step forward professionally without completely severing the connections I had rebuilt. I would start in 6 weeks, giving me time to transition my current clients and prepare for the bi-coastal lifestyle. Tilly took me out for celebratory drinks the evening after I signed the offer letter. "To new beginnings," she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. "And to the brilliant strategist who's going to make us look good on the West Coast." I couldn't have done it without you, I said sincerely. "Your mentorship changed everything for me." "Nope." She shook her head firmly. "I opened a door or two, but you walked through them on your own merit. Never forget that." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. So much of my life had been defined by what was done to me. The room taken away, the couch I was forced to sleep on, the car that became my temporary home. But my success since then? That I had built myself, one careful decision at a time. The next weekend, I met with my parents and Beth at the house to discuss our new arrangement. We gathered around the dining table, the same table where Mom had casually informed me years ago that I would be sleeping on the couch. The memory still stung, but its power had diminished, like an old photograph fading with time. "I've spoken with a property management company," I began, laying out printed materials I had prepared. "They'll handle day-to-day issues when I'm in Seattle. Beth, if you're serious about taking over the lease, we can draw up a new agreement." Beth nodded, looking more adult than I had ever seen her. "I am serious. I've already found 2 potential roommates, doctoral candidates who need a quiet place to study and can afford a decent rent share." I turned to my parents. "And you two? Have you looked more into the senior community?" "We're on the waiting list," Mom confirmed. "They estimate 6 to 8 months for a unit to become available." "Which works well with my teaching schedule," Dad added. He had recently started part-time work at a vocational school, teaching basic construction skills to high school students. It was less physically demanding than his previous contracting work and brought him unexpected satisfaction. We discussed logistics, timelines, and financial arrangements. Beth would take over the lease starting the following month, with my parents continuing to rent their bedroom until their new place was ready. I would keep my renovated bedroom for when I returned from Seattle every 2 weeks. It was all very civilized, very practical. Yet beneath the logistics lay profound shifts in our family structure. My parents, moving toward true retirement. Beth, embracing independence and responsibility. Me, pursuing career advancement across the country. And the house, the physical space that had witnessed both our fracture and partial healing, transitioning into something new as well. "There's one more thing," I said as our meeting wound down. "I'd like to have a housewarming dinner before I leave for Seattle. A proper sit-down meal with the 4 of us." Mom brightened visibly. "I could cook. Your favorite lasagna, maybe?" "Actually, I was thinking I would cook," I said. "In my house." The significance wasn't lost on any of them. Dad nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Beth caught my eye, giving me a subtle thumbs up. "We'd like that," Mom said simply. The evening of the dinner arrived quickly. I had spent the day preparing, shopping for ingredients, cleaning, setting the table with care. I chose to use the good china, the set that had belonged to my grandmother and had only emerged for special holidays during my childhood. As I moved around the kitchen, I realized how completely I had reclaimed this space. Every drawer, every cabinet now organized according to my preferences. The renovated bedroom upstairs, the fresh paint in the hallway, the new fixtures in the guest bathroom. All reflected my taste, my decisions. The house had become truly mine. Not through bitter conquest, but through steady reconstruction. My parents arrived first, Mom carrying a bouquet of flowers despite my insistence that they didn't need to bring anything. "For your table," she said, handing them to me. "Every home needs fresh flowers." Dad presented a bottle of wine. "To celebrate your new job, and everything else." Beth arrived a few minutes later with a surprisingly thoughtful gift, a framed photo of the four of us from years ago, before college, before the room incident, before everything fractured. We were at the lake, squinting into the sun, genuinely smiling. "Found it while packing," she explained. "Thought you might want it for your Seattle place. A reminder." I placed the photo on the mantel, studying our younger selves. "Thank you. It's perfect." Dinner was a success. The food turned out well. The conversation flowed more easily than I had anticipated. We reminisced about childhood memories, shared updates on current projects, and even cautiously discussed future plans. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that briefly resurfaced before being gently redirected, but overall it felt healing. As we finished dessert, Dad cleared his throat in that familiar way that signaled something important coming. "I want to say something, while we're all here together." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each of us. "I'm proud of what this family has become. Not what it was. I know we made serious mistakes." He glanced at me. "But what it is now. How we've found our way back to each other, albeit differently. To growth," Beth added, raising her glass. "And to Maya," Mom said softly, "who taught us all something about resilience." I felt a swell of emotion, not the vindication I might once have craved, but something quieter and more sustaining. Pride in my own journey. Cautious hope for our collective future. After they left, I stood in the quiet house, my house, and thought about the couch that had started everything. It was long gone, replaced with a comfortable sectional I had chosen. Myself. The memory of those nights spent on its lumpy cushions would always remain, but it no longer defined me. 2 weeks later, I boarded a plane to Seattle, carrying 2 suitcases and the framed family photo. As the aircraft lifted off, I watched my city grow smaller below, feeling neither triumph nor regret. Just the quiet certainty that I was moving forward on my own terms. The house that had once rejected me was now indisputably mine. But more importantly, so was my life. Shaped by past wounds, but no longer limited by them. I had come full circle, reclaiming not just physical space, but the right to define my own story. And that, I realized as the plane banked toward the western horizon, was the most meaningful ownership of all. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Tilly asked, her voice serious as we reviewed the final Seattle employment contract in her office. "Once you sign, everything changes." I took a deep breath, pen hovering over the signature line. The hybrid arrangement was perfect. 2 weeks in Seattle, 2 weeks back home. But it still represented a massive shift in my life. A commitment to something entirely new. "I'm certain," I said, signing my name with deliberate strokes. "It's time," Tilly smiled, taking the contract. "That's what I thought you'd say." The Maya who slept on that couch would never have believed this moment. Was possible she was right. The girl who had packed her belongings into garbage bags while her sister measured her bedroom walls could never have imagined owning that house, much less leveraging it as part of a broader life strategy that included a prestigious position across the country. That evening, I called a family meeting at the house, my house. They gathered in the living room, Mom perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, Dad in his usual armchair, Beth cross-legged on the floor like she used to sit as a teenager. "I've signed the Seattle contract," I announced. "I start in 3 weeks. Mom's hands twisted in her lap. "So soon?" "They need me to transition quickly. But I've negotiated the arrangement we discussed. 2 weeks there, 2 weeks here." And after the 6-month trial period? Dad asked. I met his gaze directly. If all goes well, they want me full-time in Seattle. A heavy silence fell over the room. We all understood what that would mean. A permanent move, a complete break from the daily presence I had reestablished in their lives. I've made some decisions about the house, I continued, pulling out a folder of documents I had prepared. Beth, I've drawn up a formal lease for you to take over as primary tenant, with the option to sublet to your roommates. She accepted the papers, scanning them with surprise. This is really generous, Maya. It's fair market value, I corrected, but with favorable terms. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, I've drafted a timeline for your transition to the senior community, including a reduced rent schedule as you prepare to move. Dad nodded, absorbing the information. You've thought of everything. And I've hired Palmer Property Management to oversee maintenance and collect rent when I'm not here. I placed their business card on the coffee table. Their fee comes out of my end, not yours. I had spent weeks preparing these arrangements, consulting with attorneys and financial advisors to ensure everything was properly structured. This wasn't just about my career move. It was about establishing an unshakable foundation for my ownership of the house while setting clear boundaries with my family. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a final document. I've created a first right, a refusal agreement. If I ever decide to sell the house, you, all three of you, will have the option to purchase it before I list it publicly. Mom's eyes widened. You would do that? The house has history for all of us, I said simply. Good and bad. This ensures that history stays in the family if that's what you want when the time comes. Beth looked up from the lease papers. When did you become so strategic about everything? I smiled slightly. Probably around the time I started sleeping in my car. The comment landed with the intended weight, not to hurt them, but to acknowledge the truth of what had shaped me. Dad cleared his throat. You've created quite a plan here. I have, I agreed. And starting next month, we're all going to follow it. As they reviewed the documents, asking questions and processing the details, I felt a profound sense of finality. There would be no going back from this moment. The daughter who had once been disposable was now dictating terms, not from vengeance but from a position of earned authority. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. I transitioned my clients at work, packed essentials for my first Seattle stay, and made arrangements for my apartment to be maintained during my absences. Throughout it all, I maintained a steady focus on the path ahead rather than the complicated emotions surrounding my decision. This was a business move, a career advancement, a strategic repositioning of my life. The fact that it also redefined my relationship with my family was significant but secondary. My last weekend before departure, I spent entirely at the house, completing the bedroom renovation that had become a symbolic reclamation of space. I installed floating shelves along one wall, mounted a television opposite the bed, and hung artwork I had carefully selected. Abstract pieces in blues and grays that spoke to something within me. Dad helped with the shelf installation, working, silently beside me as we measured and drilled. In these shared tasks, we had found a way to communicate that bypassed our complicated history. This looks good, he said finally, stepping back to admire our work. Professional grade. I had a good teacher, I replied, surprising myself with the admission. He glanced at me quickly, then away. You were always a quick study. That night, I slept in my fully completed bedroom for the first time. The mattress was new, the linens high quality, the pillows perfectly firm. As I drifted off, I realized this was the first time I had truly felt at home in this house since before that fateful Sunday dinner years ago. The next morning, Beth arrived early with coffee and pastries. We sat at the kitchen counter, reviewing the lease agreement one more time. Are you nervous? She asked. About Seattle? A little, I admitted, but mostly excited. She nodded, stirring her coffee absently. It's weird. All these years, you were the one who stayed while I got to leave. Now it's reversed. Life has a way of balancing things out eventually. Does it? She looked up, her expression serious. Or do people like you make it balance out through sheer determination? I considered her question carefully. Maybe a bit of both. By the time I left that afternoon, everything was in place. The house was officially under the management company's oversight, Beth had signed her lease, and my parents had submitted their application to the senior community. I had crossed the point of no return. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the old Maya who slept on a couch and swallowed her anger. I was now the landlord, the property owner, the rising executive heading west with nothing to prove and everything to gain. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the house growing smaller behind me. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, leaving. Again, but this time on my own terms, with keys in my pocket and a deed in my name. The first signs of resistance came 2 days after my arrival in Seattle. I was settling into my temporary corporate housing, a sleek one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, when Mom called, her voice strained with what I recognized as suppressed panic. "I've been thinking about your timeline," she began without preamble. "It might be too soon for us to start looking at those condos." I closed my eyes, counting to 3 before responding. "We discussed this, Mom. The waiting list is 6 to 8 months. You need to get on it now." "But what if the house doesn't feel the same with you gone? What if Beth's roommates are disruptive? What if—" "Mom," I interrupted gently. "These are all what ifs. We have a plan. A good plan." "Plans change," she countered. "Maybe you could reconsider the permanent move after the trial period. Just until we're settled." There it was, the old pattern trying to reassert itself. The expectation that I would rearrange my life to accommodate everyone else's comfort. "Focus right now is making this opportunity work," I said firmly. "My career needs to be my priority." She was quiet for a moment. "You've changed, Maya." "Yes," I agreed. "I have." The call ended awkwardly, and I knew it wouldn't be the last attempt to pull me back into familiar dynamics. Sure enough, Dad called the next evening, his tone casual but his purpose transparent. "Your mother's worried," he said. "She thinks everything is happening too fast." "Everything is happening exactly on schedule," I corrected. "The schedule we all agreed to." He sighed. "Maya, try to understand. For over 30 years, that house has been the center of our lives. Leaving it feels like failure." "It's not failure," I said. "It's transition, and it's necessary. Couldn't we just slow things down a bit? Maybe put off the condo deposit until you're sure about Seattle?" "Dad, the housing arrangements and my job are separate issues. You need a more accessible living situation regardless of where my career takes me." Before he could respond, another call beeped in. "Beth." I promised Dad I'd call him back and switched over. "You need to come home," Beth said, her voice tense. Mom's being impossible about the roommate situation. What happened? She suddenly decided she needs to interview anyone who might move in. She cornered Allie, my friend from the statistics department, and practically interrogated her about her cleaning habits and noise levels. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache forming. "Put Mom on the phone." "She won't talk to you. She says you've abandoned your responsibilities." The accusation stung, even knowing it was manipulation. "Beth, you're the primary tenant now. The lease gives you authority to sublet." "Try telling her that. She says it's still her home until they move." I could hear the frustration in my sister's voice, but also something else. A plea for intervention that echoed our childhood dynamic. Beth wanting me to fix things, to manage the difficult emotions, to be the responsible one. "I'm not coming back early," I said, more firmly than I intended. "The property management company can handle this. That's literally what we're paying them for." "But No, Beth. This is exactly why I hired professionals. Call Palmer Management and explain the situation. They'll mediate. Silence stretched between us. Then, surprisingly, Beth sighed. You're right. I need to handle this myself. Yes, you do. It's hard being the one they focus on now. I almost laughed. Welcome to my entire childhood. Fair point, she conceded. I'll call the management company. After we hung up, I stood at the window watching ferries cross the dark water, troubled by how quickly my carefully constructed plans were being tested. I had anticipated resistance, but not this immediate, coordinated push to re-establish the old patterns. My phone buzzed with a text from Tilly. How's Seattle treating you? I responded honestly. Seattle's great. Families being family. Her reply came, quickly. Remember, you can set boundaries without burning bridges. The wisdom of her words stayed with me through a restless night. By morning, I had formulated a new approach. I couldn't rush back at the first sign of trouble. That would only reinforce the expectation that I would always prioritize their needs. But I also couldn't completely disengage during this transition. Period. I scheduled a video call with all three of them for that evening, using the formal calendar invitation feature that I typically reserved for work meetings. The structure itself sent a message. This was not an emotional appeal, but a problem-solving session. When we connected, Mom appeared sullen, Dad looked uncomfortable, and Beth seemed caught in the middle. Familiar family positions reshuffled into a new configuration. I understand there are concerns about our arrangement, I began, keeping my tone professional. Let's address them directly. For the next hour, I guided the conversation like a business negotiation, acknowledging concerns, but firmly redirecting toward solutions. Yes, change was difficult. No, I couldn't delay my career advancement. Yes, they had lived in the house for decades. No, that didn't override the current legal and financial reality. But who will make decisions about the house while you're gone? Mom asked, returning to what seemed to be her core anxiety. I will, I said simply. With input from the property manager, from Beth as primary tenant, and from you as long-term residents. But final decisions are mine. That doesn't seem fair, I finished for her. Mom, fairness isn't relevant here. I own the house. I'm allowing all of you to live there under favorable terms. That's not unfair. That's generous. Dad winced slightly at my directness, but didn't contradict me. Beth, surprisingly, nodded in agreement. Maya's right, she said. We need to adapt to the new arrangement, not try to maintain the old one. Mom's eyes welled with tears. Whether genuine emotion or tactical, I couldn't be sure. I just miss the way things were, when we were all together. We were never all together after I moved out, I reminded her gently. You just didn't have to confront that reality because I wasn't around to remind you. The call ended with tentative resolution. Mom agreed to stop interfering with Beth's roommate selection. Dad committed to following up on the senior community application. Beth promised to work directly with the property management company for day-to-day issues. I scheduled another video meeting for the following week, institutionalizing a regular check-in that would provide structure without emergency interventions. After hanging up, I felt drained but determined. This was the hardest part. The resistance to change, the testing of boundaries, the emotional manipulation disguised as concern. If I could weather this storm, the new normal would eventually establish itself. My first 2 weeks in Seattle passed in a blur of introductions, orientation sessions, and initial project planning. I immersed myself in the work, grateful for the professional challenge that kept my mind occupied during the day and left me productively exhausted at night. The team was welcoming, the projects exciting, the potential for advancement clear. I found myself thriving in the new environment, my confidence growing with each successful meeting and well-received proposal. When the time came to return home for my first 2-week remote work period, I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. Would the boundaries I had established hold? Or would I walk into a house still governed by old dynamics? As the plane touched down, I steeled myself for whatever awaited me. This was the next test, returning not as the dutiful daughter, not as the displaced sister, but as the owner setting foot once again on her property. The house looked different somehow when my taxi pulled up, not physically altered, but as if my perception had shifted during my 2 weeks away. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, luggage beside me, seeing the property with new eyes. The slightly worn siding, the meticulous landscaping my father maintained, the bay window where I had once dreamed of escape. All familiar, yet strangely distant, like a photograph of somewhere I had once lived. I used my key to enter, calling out a hello as I stepped inside. Beth appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Welcome back, landlord," she said with a small smile. "How was Seattle? Productive, different, good." I set down my bags. "How are things here?" "Better now. Mom had her meltdown, Dad did his brooding thing. I panicked and called you. Then we all adjusted." She shrugged. The usual family drama, just with new titles. Her self-awareness surprised me. "Your roommates?" "Moving in this weekend. 2 doctoral. Candidates like I mentioned, Alicia and Jamie. Mom finally gave her reluctant blessing after the property manager stepped in." I nodded, pleased that the system I had put in place was functioning. "Where are Mom and Dad?" "At a condo open house, believe it or not. Dad finally convinced her to at least look at the options." This was unexpected progress. I followed Beth into the kitchen where she had been preparing dinner, another surprising development. Throughout our childhood, Beth had managed to avoid cooking responsibilities entirely. "I'm making pasta," she said, returning to the stove. "Nothing fancy, but edible. You're welcome to join us." "Us?" "Me and the parents. We've been doing Sunday dinner together. It seemed important to maintain some traditions through all the changes." The role reversal was striking, Beth initiating family gatherings, cooking meals, facilitating transitions. She had stepped into the stabilizing role I had always occupied, without my having to ask. "That would be nice," I said, genuinely meaning it. Dinner that evening was a revelation. Mom and Dad arrived with brochures from the senior community, animated as they described the amenities and floor plans. There was still tension beneath the surface, sidelong glances, careful phrasing, but the outright resistance had mellowed into cautious adaptation. "There's a 2-bedroom available in August," Dad said, pushing a floor plan across the table to me. "We put down a deposit today." "That's great," I said, studying the layout. "Looks spacious." Mom nodded, though her smile remained tight. "It has an extra room for guests, for when you visit." The implication was clear. They were creating space for me in their new home, a symbolic reversal of what had happened years ago. "I'd like that," I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. After dinner, I retreated to my bedroom, my sanctuary within the house, to set up my workstation for the next 2 weeks. The space felt instantly comfortable, tailored precisely to my preferences, a physical manifestation of my new authority. My first full day back established the pattern for this new arrangement. I worked remotely during business hours, attended virtual meetings with the Seattle team, and focused on deliverables with the same intensity I had brought to the office there. Evenings were spent on house matters, reviewing the property manager's reports, discussing Beth's renovation ideas for the common areas, planning my own future projects. A week into my stay, I scheduled a formal inspection with the property management company. We walked the entire house, noting maintenance needs, discussing potential improvements, and updating the property condition report. "The roof will need replacement within 3 years," the manager noted, making entries on his tablet, "and the furnace is approaching end of life." Start getting estimates, I instructed. I want to budget for major repairs proactively. My parents watched this process with a mixture of resentment and respect, uncomfortable with strangers evaluating their home, yet impressed by my methodical approach to property management. We always meant to replace that roof, Dad said afterward, a defensive edge to his voice. Money was just tight with Beth's education. I know, I said evenly. But it's my responsibility now. I'll handle it. He nodded, something shifting in his expression. You really are good at this, Maya. The planning, the managing, all of it. The compliment, so simple yet so unexpected, momentarily threw me off balance. Thanks, Dad. That evening, Beth invited her soon-to-be roommates over for dinner to meet everyone. Alicia was a reserved engineering PhD candidate, Jamie a more outgoing psychology researcher. Both were serious about their studies, respectful of the house, and clearly relieved to have found affordable housing near campus. We can't thank you enough for this opportunity, Alicia said earnestly. The rental market is impossible right now. Maya's the one to thank, Beth said, gesturing toward me. She owns the house. Oh! Jamie looked between us, clearly trying to understand the family dynamics. That's unusual? For someone your age to own such a nice property? An awkward silence fell over the table. Mom studied her plate. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. It is unusual, I acknowledged, but circumstances aligned to make it possible. Beth caught my eye across the table, a silent question in her gaze. How much should they know? Maya saved the house when our parents faced foreclosure, she said finally, her voice steady. Before that, she had to move out rather suddenly when I needed her room for university. It's a full-circle moment, really. The simplicity of her summary, neither hiding the truth nor dwelling on the painful details, struck me as perfectly calibrated. She had found a way to acknowledge our history without weaponizing it. That's amazing, Alicia said, looking at me with new respect. Family helping family. Something like that, I agreed, raising my water glass in a small toast. Later, after the guests had left, I found Beth washing dishes in the kitchen. I picked up a towel and began drying without comment. I hope that wasn't overstepping, she said after a moment, mentioning the room situation to them. It wasn't, I assured her. It's our history. No point pretending it didn't happen. She nodded, scrubbing a stubborn pan. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. How I never questioned getting your room, getting financial support, getting everything, really. You were young, I said, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. Not that young, old enough to notice how differently we were treated. She passed me the clean pan. I should have said something. It was the closest thing to an apology she had ever offered, and it struck deeper than I had expected. Not because I needed her contrition, but because it signaled genuine growth. We were all shaped by the dynamics Mom and Dad created, I said. You didn't invent the golden child role any more than I invented the responsible one. Still, Beth insisted, I benefited from your displacement. That matters. Her acknowledgement, so direct, so unequivocal, felt like the closing of a long open wound. Not healed entirely, but finally, properly cleaned and dressed. The remainder of my 2 weeks at home passed in a rhythm of work, house management, and carefully navigated family interactions. Beth's roommates moved in, bringing new energy to the house. Mom and Dad began packing non-essential items for their eventual move, a tentative acceptance of the coming change. As my departure date for Seattle approached, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The resistance had transformed into reluctant acceptance, and in some cases, even tentative enthusiasm for our new arrangement. My authority as homeowner was no longer challenged at every turn. The property management company's role was respected, Beth's position as primary tenant was established. Most significantly, I no longer felt like I was fighting for legitimacy within my own home. The house was mine, legally, financially, and now, finally, emotionally. The power dynamic that had defined our family for decades had irrevocably shifted, not through confrontation but through consistent reinforcement of the new reality. On my last evening before returning to Seattle, I stood in my bedroom, surveying the space I had claimed and transformed. The blue walls, the personal artwork, the carefully selected furniture, all reflections of my taste rather than compromises to accommodate others' preferences. This, I realized, was what I had truly reclaimed. Not just property ownership, but the right to exist on my own terms, to occupy space without apology, to make decisions without deferring to others' comfort. The daughter who had once slept on a couch, stored her life in plastic bins, and eventually fled to her car had become the homeowner whose authority was now unquestioned. Not through inheritance or good fortune, but through her own determination and strategic vision. The transformation was complete, visible not just in legal documents but in the subtle shifts of behavior throughout the household. In how Mom now asked rather than instructed. In how Dad consulted before making repairs. In how Beth coordinated rather than assumed. As I packed for my return to Seattle, I felt the weight of vindication, not as a crushing burden of resentment, but as the solid foundation of justice finally served. Seattle welcomed me back with steady rain and the excited energy of the office. The team had made progress on our major campaigns during my absence, and Michelle, the regional director, was eager for my input on several strategic decisions. "The hybrid arrangement is working better than I expected," she admitted during our one-on-one meeting. "You seem to come back more energized after your time at home." "It's a good balance," I agreed. "Different environments stimulate different kinds of thinking." What I didn't say was how the contrast between my two lives, rising executive in Seattle, property owner at home, provided a perspective I had never anticipated. Each role strengthened the other, building confidence that transferred across contexts. My second 2-week stint in Seattle passed quickly, filled with client presentations, team development, and growing responsibilities. I found myself thriving in this new environment, appreciated for my strategic mind and calm leadership rather than just my reliability. When I returned home again, the changes were immediately noticeable. Beth's roommates had fully moved in, bringing youthful energy to the house. My parents had boxed up much of their decor, the walls now showing squares of unfaded paint where family photos had hung for decades. The condo association called. Mom reported over dinner my first night back. "Our unit will be ready in July instead of August." "That's good news," I said cautiously, watching her reaction. "Yes," she agreed, surprising me with her matter-of-fact acceptance. "We've started furniture shopping. Most of our things are too large for the new place." Dad nodded. "Been going through the garage too. 30 years of accumulated tools and materials, most of which I haven't touched in years." There was a note of wistfulness in his voice, but not the resistance I had feared. They were moving forward, making practical decisions about their transition. "I can help with the sorting this weekend," I offered. "That would be good," Dad said. "You should decide what house maintenance items to keep here." The casual acknowledgement of my ownership, here rather than our home, marked another subtle but significant shift. Dad was recognizing my authority not just legally, but practically, consulting me as the person responsible for the property's upkeep. Over the following months, the rhythm of my bi-coastal life established itself. 2 weeks immersed in Seattle's tech-driven business culture. 2 weeks overseeing the continuing evolution of the family home. Each time I returned, the transformation was more evident, both in the physical space and in our family dynamics. By my 4th rotation, Beth and her roommates had settled into a comfortable routine. They were respectful of the property, prompt. With rent payments and considerate of my parents' presence, Beth herself had emerged as a surprisingly effective household manager, mediating minor disputes and coordinating shared responsibilities. "You know what's weird?" she said one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on the back porch. "I'm actually enjoying this role, making sure everything runs smoothly, being the point person." "It suits you," I observed. "You've always been good with people." She laughed softly. "I think I'm just finally growing up, seeing how much work goes into maintaining a household, a property. It's been educational. Better late than never." "Exactly, though I still wish—" She stopped herself. "Wish what?" Beth sighed, swirling her wine. "I wish I'd understood sooner what you did for this family. How much you carried while I just existed, basically." The acknowledgement warmed something in me that had remained cold for years. Not because I needed her validation, but because it signified genuine growth on her part. "We all did what we thought was expected of us," I said. "You were taught to accept. I was taught to provide. And now we're learning new roles," she mused. "It's better this way, healthier." As the 6-month mark of my hybrid arrangement approached, Michelle scheduled a formal review meeting to discuss the future. The Seattle position was thriving under my leadership, exceeding projections and building strong client relationships. "We'd like to make the Seattle position permanent," she said, sliding a formal offer across the table. "With some flexibility for occasional remote work, but primarily based here." The salary was exceptional, the responsibilities challenging, the career trajectory clear. From a purely professional standpoint, accepting was the obvious choice. "I'll need some time to consider," I said, taking the offer packet. Michelle nodded. "Of course. But Maya," she leaned forward, "you've built something impressive here in a short time. The team respects you. The clients trust you. This could be a defining move for your career." That night, I video called Tilly from my Seattle apartment, seeking the guidance of the mentor who had seen me through so many transitions. "The offer is outstanding," she confirmed after reviewing the details. "Professionally speaking, it's everything we've been working toward." "But?" I prompted, hearing the qualification in her tone. "But nothing. It's your decision, Maya. The question isn't whether it's a good opportunity. It clearly is. The question is what you want your life to look like. Now, I've built something at home too," I said slowly. "Not just ownership of the house, but a new kind of relationship with my family." Tilly nodded. "And that matters to you." "It shouldn't, after everything." "But it does." The admission felt vulnerable, like exposing a weakness. "Does that make me a pushover? Going back to prioritizing family after how they treated me?" "No," Tilly said firmly. "It makes you someone who values connection and has the strength to rebuild it on better terms. That's not weakness, Maya. That's profound resilience." Her perspective shifted something in my thinking. Perhaps maintaining family ties, now reconstructed, on foundations of mutual respect rather than exploitation, wasn't surrendering. Perhaps it was the ultimate victory, creating something healthy from what had once been toxic. I returned home for what would be my final 2-week period under the hybrid arrangement, decision still unmade. The house was in transition, my parents actively packing now, Beth and her roommates fully established, my renovated bedroom a sanctuary of calm amid the changes. One evening, Dad asked me to help move some larger items to the donation center. As we worked side by side loading the truck, he seemed unusually thoughtful. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said finally, securing a bookshelf with bungee cords, "about Seattle becoming permanent." I tensed slightly. "What about it?" "We think you should take it." He straightened, meeting my gaze directly. "It's a great opportunity, Maya. The kind parents want for their children." The simplicity of his statement, free from manipulation or guilt, caught me off guard. "Really? Really?" He gestured around us. "You've fixed this situation. The house is yours, legally and practically." We're moving somewhere more appropriate for our age. Beth has grown up more in 6 months as your tenant than in years under our roof." He smiled faintly. "You've done enough here. It's time to build your own life fully." I studied his face, searching for hidden agendas or unspoken expectations. Finding none, I asked the question that had been lingering beneath the surface of all our interactions. "Why did you let me sleep on the couch, Dad? Why did you let me leave with nowhere to go?" He flinched, but didn't look away. "Because we took you for granted. Because you were always so capable, so independent. Because," he hesitated, "because it was easier to let you sacrifice than to tell Beth no." The honesty of his answer released something that had been knotted inside me for years. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition of the difficult truth we had all been circling. "We can't undo it," he continued quietly. "But we can stop repeating the pattern. You deserve Seattle. You've earned it." Later that week, Mom invited me to tour their soon-to-be-finished condo. The space was bright and accessible, with wide doorways for Dad's occasional mobility issues and a layout designed for aging in place. "It's perfect for you," I said, genuinely impressed. "It's a new chapter," Mom agreed. "Downsizing has been harder than I expected, but also freeing somehow." She showed me the guest room they had designated for visits, already painted in soothing blues similar to my bedroom at the house. A small gesture of continuity, of welcome. "Seattle is permanent, isn't it?" she asked as we prepared to leave. "I'm considering it," I said carefully. She nodded, her expression complex but resigned. "You should. You've found your path, Maya. We'll be fine." On my last day before returning to Seattle, I gathered everyone together for dinner at the house. Beth and her roommates prepared an elaborate meal, my parents brought wine, and I provided dessert from my favorite local bakery. We sat around the dining room table, the same table where, years earlier, I had been casually informed I would be sleeping on the couch. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I looked around at the faces of these people who had been central to both my deepest wounds and my unexpected healing. My parents, now visibly older, but somehow lighter as they approached their transition to the condo. Beth, grown into a responsibility she had never before been asked to shoulder. Her roommates, earnest and grateful, bringing fresh energy to the old house. "I've made my decision about Seattle," I announced as we finished the main course. All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled concern. "I'm accepting the permanent position." Dad nodded approvingly, raising his glass and a small toast. Mom's smile was tinged with sadness but free from resentment. Beth reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. "I've also made some decisions about the house," I continued. "When Mom and Dad move out next month, Beth will take over as property manager as well as primary tenant." Beth's eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" "You've proven yourself capable," I said simply. "The arrangement with your roommates is working well, and you've shown good judgment in handling household issues." "What about your room?" she asked. "Your sanctuary?" "It stays mine," I clarified, "for visits and for the times I need to work from here, but I'll be primarily based in Seattle." Mom looked between us, something like wonder crossing her face. "You two have worked out a way to share the house. After everything." "It's different now," I said. "We're equals in this arrangement. Partners, not competitors." Dad cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "I wish we had fostered that partnership from the beginning." The acknowledgement hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity. Not an explicit apology, but a recognition of where things had gone wrong, and an appreciation for how they had been made right. After dinner, I took a solitary walk through the house, touching door frames and wall corners, reacquainting myself with the physical space that had shaped so much of my identity. The living room where the couch had once been my reluctant bed. the kitchen where family dinners had ranged from casual cruelty to genuine connection. The staircase I had descended with packed bags, heading into an uncertain future. I ended in my renovated bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking at the space I had claimed and transformed. Blue walls, carefully selected artwork, quality, furniture, all representing choices made on my terms, from a position of ownership rather than accommodation. The room was different now, just as I was different. Neither defined by past wounds nor constrained by old roles. Both transformed through deliberate reclamation and conscious design. The following morning, before heading to the airport, I signed the formal acceptance of the Seattle position and emailed it to Human Resources. Then I finalized the property management agreement, giving Beth authority to oversee day-to-day operations in my absence. "It's a lot of responsibility," I cautioned as I handed her the signed paperwork. "I know," she said seriously, "but I'm ready for it. The property manager will still handle major issues, but you'll be my eyes and ears here." She nodded, understanding the trust being placed in her. "I won't let you down." "I know," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. My parents stopped by to say goodbye before my departure, bringing a small gift, a framed photo of the house taken when they first purchased it decades ago. "For your Seattle apartment," Mom explained. "So you remember where it all began." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. Not because I needed reminding of the house, but because it acknowledged both our complex history and our ongoing connection. "I'll find the perfect spot for it," I promised. As my taxi pulled away, I watched the house recede in the rear window. The symmetry struck me once more, leaving again, just as I had years before. But this time, I wasn't fleeing in desperation with garbage bags of hastily packed belongings. I was departing purposefully, with a clear destination and secure knowledge of what I was leaving behind. The house remained mine, legally, financially, emotionally. But I was no longer defined by it, or by what had happened within its walls. I had accomplished the reclamation I needed, established the boundaries I deserved, and was now free to build something entirely new elsewhere. Seattle embraced me with its distinctive blend of technology and nature, ambition and reflection. I leased a modern apartment overlooking the water, furnished it with carefully selected pieces that spoke to my aesthetic, and built a life that extended beyond work to include hiking groups, pottery classes, and eventually, tentative dating. Every 2 months. I returned home for a long weekend, staying in my preserved bedroom and observing the continuing evolution of the household. Beth flourished in her role as property manager, handling minor repairs, mediating roommate dynamics, and maintaining the standard I had established. My parents settled into their senior community, gradually building new routines and friendships. Their condo became a gathering place for weekly dinners, holiday celebrations, and occasional overnight stays when I visited from Seattle. Over time, the house itself transformed. Beth and her roommates added their own touches: a vegetable garden in the backyard, updated kitchen appliances, a refurbished deck for outdoor studying. I approved each change, recognizing that a home needs to evolve with its inhabitants. A year after my permanent move to Seattle, I received a promotion to creative director, overseeing all strategic initiatives for the Pacific Northwest region. The announcement came with congratulatory calls from my family, genuine in their pride, free from the undercurrents of resentment or manipulation that would have colored such moments in the past. That evening, sitting on my Seattle balcony watching ferries cross the Sound, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From displaced daughter to car-dwelling survivor to apartment tenant to homeowner to successful executive, each phase building on the last, each challenge forcing growth I might otherwise have avoided. The room I had lost, and later reclaimed, had never really been about physical space. It had been about worth, about whether I deserved to occupy space at all, to have needs acknowledged, to exist on my own terms. Owning the house had been the ultimate reclamation of that worth. Not because property equaled value, but because the journey to ownership had required me to recognize and assert my own value when no one else would. The couch that had once been my reluctant bed was long gone now, replaced years ago with a sectional Beth had chosen for the living room. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this one, I remembered how it felt to lie there in the dark, listening to my family sleep soundly in their private rooms, wondering why my comfort mattered less than theirs. That girl, sleeping on the couch, could never have imagined that she would one day own the very walls around her, that she would dictate who lived within them and under what terms, that she would eventually choose to build her primary life elsewhere, not from defeat, but from empowered choice. I raised my glass to her memory, to her pain, her determination, her unwillingness to remain invisible. The couch had been meant as her diminishment, but had instead become the catalyst for her greatest strength. "You made it," I whispered to that past self. Not despite them, but because you refused to be defined by their limitations. The sun set over Elliott Bay, painting the water in shades of gold and deep blue. From my vantage point high above the city, everything looked different, smaller in some ways, vaster in others. Rather like how the past appeared now, still significant, still formative, but no longer confining. I owned the house, yes, but more importantly, I owned my story, every painful chapter, every hard-won victory. And in the end, that was the ownership that truly mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.